Hey there, everyone. Good to see you again. Today, I'm going to be making some mini books for the Nooks in a Book Nook, I guess. So let's just get started. So I've got my little scale to figure out size. On this side, I've got inches, and then this is the foot scale, sort of based on my dude here in the middle of the scale of my project. So the smallest book I've made so far is about 3/8 of an inch tall. Now that's about 12 inches or a foot with relation to my person here. So in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty big book still. But if we were to look at this one, this is kind of the largest. It's actually kind of gigantic. So this is really quite a big, hefty tome. Now, to create these, I'm going to need a few different weights of paper. For the cover, I'm going to need something that's sort of a heavy chipboard or tagboard. This is about 20 point or 0.02. It's kind of the weight of a cereal box, give or take. Probably could just use a cereal box, but it's got to be sort of heavy for the cover. I also need sort of a lighter weight for a lot of the details, like the straps and things that I'd want to build. And then I need some regular old printer paper for the pages. For cutting everything, I need something sharp. I need some sort of straight edge ruler. I'm not really doing a bunch of measuring. It's kind of eyeballing it, but I do need a straight edge to make straight cuts. I'm gonna need some pliers like this. Now these are kind of unusual in that they are flat jawed. They don't have any serrations in the jaw itself. So it's very smooth, very flat. And then it's also very flat along the top. And you're going to see why that's important because I'm going to actually do some burnishing of the paper on the top of the pliers. So this is kind of an important little tool to have. I also need some wires. So I need some different thicknesses. So something like this T-pin where I cut the tip off. Some wire like this is from some jewelry fittings. I have this aluminum rod that is, about maybe, I want to say kind of about 2 millimeters, give or take. I think it's about 2 mil. This is about as thick as I ever would use for the projects, but it really depends on how big a book you're making, and you'll see why in a minute. I also need some sort of adhesive. This is some PVA in a little squeezy bottle, but I could just as easily use some sort of school glue and a paintbrush. I don't need any special dropper. I'm going to start by making the cover, and I'm going to use my heaviest material. So I'm going to make sort of a medium-sized book here, and the first thing I want to do is cut a strip, and it's going to be the height of the book. So that is really our first cut. And so we're going to cut a long strip that is going to be basically the height of the book that we're trying to make. So I'm going to mark it here and just cut a little old strip. Not really being too precise here. A lot of this is really just eyeballing, and we kind of actually want a little bit of variety in books, so that we've got some rhythm and variety and difference in things we're making. We don't want it to be too cookie cutter or too even Steven because it just starts to be a little monotonous and boring. So once I've got my strip cut, the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to basically fold it roughly in half, and I'm going to wrap it around one of the rods or the wires that I'm using. And that's going to really be dependent on how thick the book is, how much space I need to create for the pages. So if I want a really skinny book, I might use something like this T-pin. And if I want something a little bit thicker, I could use this wider one, or I could move up to that really thick one. So the basic process here is to wrap it around the material. But the first thing I want to do is just kind of give it a nice sort of straight little bend so that I don't get a funky little crease or diagonal crease because the material is fairly thick. So I'm going to give it a little bend there just so that it's nice and crispy. I'm going to wrap it around this This is just a piece of styrene. Literally could be anything that you got laying around that's the right thickness. Once I've got it wrapped, I'm going to get the super spiffy, special, flat-jawed pliers, and I'm going to get right up on that cylinder, that area, and just really scrunch it down nice and tight. I really want to get a good crimp there. You can see just how tight it is, and it's really forcing that paper around the rod. I try to pull it up really tight and get it as close as I can around the wire or that little piece of polystyrene, and then carefully remove it. I could probably just let it go and, slide it out and then realign it. But, I try to make things a little bit harder for myself. But I want to get that nice and aligned so that for the next step, when I start to burnish it down, I'm making this kind of as even as possible. So I want to press it flat, press that circular opening flat, but I don't want to scrunch it to one side, right or left. I want to try and just really push it down to almost kind of a T shape. If I slide the cover part up closer to the handle, I can really burnish down on that flat space, and you can see why these flat jaw pliers are really useful for this. And this is the cover. This is basically the raw part of the cover. I do need to trim it a little bit to make it the right width, and that's the thing I'm going to do next. Now to do that, again, I'm just eyeballing it. There's no measuring really. There's no particular thing I'm going for. I just want it to sort of feel like it's got the right proportions of a book. So again, just trying to make sure it's relatively squared. So I'm aligning it a little bit through the transparent ruler that I have, but there's no measurements. There's no special anything. It's just all eyeballing. And that's really the cover. It's as easy as that. It's just, it's super simple. And the nice thing is, the reason I kind of started folding them in the middle of the long strips is now I've got a couple pieces that are left over, and I can continue to just take them and bend them in the middle and use them until I don't have any more bending. And it should look like, when everything is said and done, something a little bit like this. Now, I need to make the pages, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my regular sort of printer paper, and I want it to be inset a little bit from the edges of the cover. It doesn't go all the way to the end. Books always have a little bit of an overlap or an extension, and so I'm just going to mark it, again, completely just eyeballing this. I'm going to mark it where I want to cut it, and I'm going to cut a long strip of this thin paper. Again, thickness of the paper doesn't really matter. It could be a lighter weight paper. If you're really wanting to make stuff feel to scale, you could try and find some super thin paper. But I'm just going to start folding it in half. I'm going to fold it in half once. I'm going to fold it in half twice. And I'm going to fold it one more time. I'm not trying to beat any folding records. Just give it a pinch. And this is now going to be the basis for my pages. I'm going to take the end that's got that fold, and this is going to be the part that I insert into the book. So it'll just tuck right in, and we're going to glue this all in. The interesting thing is that this is actually kind of a traditional bookbinding method. This little thing with these folded pages is called a signature, and that is a collection of folds that are used to assemble a book. And so rather than trying to fold thicker pieces of paper, we just add additional signatures. And so they would be actually joined together, stacked and stitched together. And that stitching is actually what creates those little connectors and the raised bumps that you see in traditional bookbinding. That is where the signatures are stitched together. There's a piece of material that really holds them horizontally. So kind of a little tidbit there. But it is interesting that we're making miniature books using a very similar traditional method. So I do need to trim the pages to the right size. And if you do find that you've folded it too much and you don't have enough space in your cover, just unfold a little bit and stack them till you get the right thickness for the thickness of the book. Once I've got that figured out, I'll just go ahead and tuck it into the cover. And then I want to mark on the edge of the pages where it's not where I need to cut. It's actually the edge of the cover, but I want to cut just a little bit inside. Again, I want the pages inset a little bit into the cover. I'm going to use the ruler on the folded side and use it to hold it in place so the pages don't slip, and then just trim a little bit inside of that line that I've drawn. Couple passes, few passes, I don't need to do it all in one shot. And that is how I make the pages. At this point, I'm going to glue them into the cover. And so just taking a little bit of the PVA glue, again, this could be regular old school glue. It could be applied with a paintbrush, with your finger, with anything. You know, we don't need any special tools for this. I'm kind of just blobbing it in, not even really being, sadly, all that careful. I don't really need to be. This stuff's pretty small, so as long as it's not too much glue and too oozy, it's not a real problem. And the tag board or chipboard's pretty absorbent too. It soaks up a lot of the glue. Just going to tuck the pages in and then squeeze them together a little bit, clean up any glue that might ooze out. I could use a Q-tip. And then I'm going to make sure that they're all seated really well and they're pushed in back against the back of the spine. And I can use just a toothpick or end of a paintbrush. And then just hold in place with something, a clamp, a clothespin, anything that can hold it while it dries. So once it's dry, if you were to open it up, the pages would actually still some of them would still fall out. So I'm taking a little bit of my glue and I'm thinning it down and I'm just brushing it along the edge of the pages to sort of glue and bind those pages together, because really the glue is only on the spine and the outer pages. And so all of those folded parts of the signature would have just slid out. So this is a way to just glue them all together. And if I wanted the pages to be sort of open, I could actually unclamp it and maybe sort of semi-open the book, and then again give it a little bit of a glue edge gluing to hold everything in place, and then go ahead and let that dry. The next thing I want to think about is surface texture. So to get that sort of those ridges that are caused by the signature binding, I'm going to apply kind of a big gigantic pool of glue here, probably more than I needed, and just lay some threads across the spine of the book. Depending on the size of the book and sort of how much you want this to stand out, will depend, that'll determine how thick the string and or thread is. It actually needs to be fairly thin. This was some sort of a jeweler's, jewelry weaving twine sort of thing that I actually had to unwind because it was actually just too big. You can see I got a lot of glue, and so I'll take a brush and just sort of clean it up so that I don't have big blobs and pools. This is all going to be painted, so that covers, again, everyone says paint covers a lot of sins. Once I've sort of cleaned up the gross excess of glue, I can just nudge these into place and go ahead and let those dry like everything else. The final step is to trim everything up, and then I just give it a little bit of a burnish to try and blend the tips of those threads into the edge of the book. Now, for books that have straps or things that are holding together, clasps, what I want to do is use that sort of thinner, sort of heavy construction paper to make these. And so I'm going to use that lighter weight paper and just cut some really thin, like super thin strips of this for the the buckle straps that hold the books together. These are really thin. Like this is super skinny little pieces of paper. Just cut a little chunk off here. I'm going to take my book and I need to figure out how long these need to be roughly. So I'm just going to wrap it around. Again, no measuring, no precision here, just kind of roughly wrap it around. Give it a little mark, and then I'm going to cut a couple of these. I'm going to go ahead and trim the edges a little bit. I'm going to cut them into little triangles or little points. It's a kind of a small detail and kind of hard to see, but depending on your painting, if you really pick out the edges or you highlight them or dry brush them or, you know, pop a little bit of those edges, it does kind of help break that edge up. Of course, if you want your straps to be squares, that's fine too. It's really just lots of little sort of nuance here, but you can see it's super tiny and probably not the most visible depending on the application. Now, one thing I found is if I give them a little bit of a soak and get them kind of mushy and squishy, they wrap a lot better. They drape a little bit better. And so I just throw them in some water and let them soak up some moisture and kind of soften up. And going back to the book, I'm going to, you know, kind of rinse and repeat my famous technique of applying way too much glue to the project and then finding that I somehow didn't end up with enough glue. And so I have to reapply more glue, and then I just glue it to my finger. You know, not again, this is not really hyper precision work here. The decorating of them can really be just up to you. You can do all sorts of things, and it's just really kind of this, it's wide open. Some will not have any decoration. Some have some straps, some have a single strap. You know, really can be any number of designs. And then you can do a lot just with the painting. And so you can apply a lot of texture with paint. And at this scale, you really don't need a ton of actual surface detail. The other thing I'm really good at is kind of gluing things to my fingers as I'm trying to position things. So my fingers get coated in glue, and then I touch things, and then those things suddenly become stuck to my fingers, and then I rip them off, and then it's not good at all. It's really good having a paintbrush and a little bit of water around, though, to clean up and kind of touch up. You know, this is, again, a lot of the PVA, as long as you've got a fairly thin coat on there, the tag board and cardboard will soak up a lot of it. So it's surprising how, you know, really how flat it'll all dry. But I just want to make sure I don't have any really, really egregious globs of glue. And that's kind of it. That's a couple little straps on that book. The final step is really to just paint them up in a bunch of different colors. I use some gold for different details. I'll give them washes to pop out the things, a little dry brushing, some weathering, you know, whatever your magic is for making things look cool and amazing. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And we will see you back for another random making encounter really soon.